Okay, hey everybody, welcome back. Good afternoon to you guys. How you guys doing? Hope you're doing really good. It's Monday, April 27th. We're about to go into our 2:30 to 3:45 Intro to Philosophy lecture. Hey Sean, good to see you. How you guys doing? Yeah, so we have a couple more meetings this week. We're pretty much down to the last two lectures or so. And then next week we have some good review sessions that we'll get into to get you guys started preparing for the final. I'm going to be distributing the study guide questions for the review sessions and final later in the week. So sometime after our Wednesday class lecture, I'll distribute them over Titanium. Hey Daniel, anybody there that's watching this, definitely feel free to give a little shout out and say hi. It's always nice to see you guys and see who's here. We still got a few minutes, obviously, till it's 2:30, but at any point, as usual, just feel free to break in with your comments, questions, and anything else under the sun. I'm always happy to help, and the interaction's, I think, good for everybody. So that's something we know, but just it's always good to remember that. But yeah, we're almost ready to go. We'll talk about the physicalists today, the other side of this whole philosophy of mind debate, discuss their material for sure. Just open my book here to the pages we need. Okay. Getting a little more warm weather now. So, when I'm doing these live streams and stuff, I live right next to, hey Abraham, I live right next to Pacific Coast Highway. So like if I was to open my balcony window or whatever, you'd hear the passing traffic and stuff like that. So I keep the windows and everything closed to minimize any kind of sound during these live streams. But it gets a little bit toasty actually right now with the heat coming on. I would have fans and everything going, but then that creates a little noise too. So just, the little small, not complaining, but small struggles of the quarantine teaching situation. Hey, Anthony, nice to see you there too. And same to everybody. Good to know you guys are here. We have a few minutes to go, so appreciate you guys for showing up early. Oh, yeah. I probably should. I mean, I have an AC unit here in the apartment. Let me see. If I turn it on, is it going to bother this? Let me see. I'm telling you, my AC unit's on right now. Can you hear it? Is it bothering you? Is it making me less audible if I'm just talking? You could be honest, because if so, I'll turn it off like I have been turning it off. Not a big deal, not a problem. Is it at all audible, even if it's a small, minimal amount, or can you not even hear it at all? Maybe you can't. I'm in the room, so the mic's probably not picking up things that are a little further away from the computer. Okay, that's good to know. Then in that case, have a little more nice cool temperature while we're going over these notes. Perfect, thanks guys. Okay. So just a few seconds and we'll be underway. All right, guys. Well, it's mostly 2:30 at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and start. Welcome back, everybody. Good afternoon to you guys. Hopefully you had a great weekend and all your other classes are going well and that you're all healthy and staying safe. So far, I haven't heard anybody say otherwise, so for the most part, I guess that's good news. We're all getting through this weird, crazy semester together, and I think we've managed pretty well, at least for our class. So I appreciate it, and here we go. So we're going to continue talking about philosophy of mind. We have a little bit more notes on this that we need to cover because it's obviously one of the selected options for your paper prompts that is due next week. So I'm going to go on then and talk to you a little bit more about the debate between monism and dualism. So just a little bit of a quick refresher. We are now on the subject of philosophy of mind in this class, which is a subject that is all about consciousness, perception, thought. You know, where is that coming from or how does it exist? What's the nature of it? What's the nature of consciousness and the mental? So here's one way of putting the question. Is consciousness just based on physical things? Is it just based on the brain and the physical neurochemistry of the brain? Or is there something about consciousness that goes beyond this, the physical? Is it something that cannot really be ultimately explained just on the basis of physical matter? There are different positions on that topic, so there's monism and dualism. Monism says that the whole universe and everything in it is made just out of one type of substance. Dualism says that everything in the universe is made out of two kinds of substance. Now, these two possible substances that are being discussed, on the one hand, one of them is called physical matter, okay? And physical matter, if you remember, is just anything that's extended in space. So it's anything that occupies some part of space, that has some kind of mass, shape, volume, size. Even if it's very small, if it's extended in space, it's something that's made out of physical matter. And the ultimate, most minimalist constituent of physical matter is basically thought of as the atom. Okay, so that's one of the types of substance that's being discussed in these two different theories, monism and dualism. The other one is the mind. Okay, so mind, the term itself, as it's used in this field of philosophy, it refers to something that has not got any extension in space. So something that literally just does not occupy space at all. Not a small amount, not a minuscule amount, but just zero, just no extension in space. So literally not made out of matter and having no mass, extension, size, shape, or volume, but nonetheless is thinking and has consciousness. So you got to think on that side, the idea of mind as something that is totally immaterial, lacking in all material substance, but yet devoid of substance and material form, it's still a thinking, conscious thing. So kind of like the idea of a ghost or soul or spirit, I should say, bound up with your body but distinct from it and capable of existing apart from the body. Now, monism can be one of two types, depending on which substance the individual monist is claiming to be the only kind. So one version of monism is called physicalism, and that's the one which says that everything in the whole universe is made out of matter, that physical matter substance. So according to physicalism, even us with our consciousness, our thoughts, our ideas, that's all just made out of matter too. It's just the brain activity, the neurology, neurochemistry of that brain, and that's what's the thing that's responsible for consciousness. According to physicalism, everything's made out of matter. Consciousness is just something else that's made out of matter too. It may be very interesting and unique, but it's nothing other than a physical process of the brain. Now, the other type of monism, which I told you, I guess, that it's not so important to us, but just to be clear, there's also idealism, which says that there's no matter and everything's made out of ideas. And so everything around you are just ideas and thoughts. There's actually no material substance. But I think I've mentioned, and I'll repeat, we really aren't too much focused on the idealism side of the argument. We're more looking at comparing and contrasting physicalist monism with dualism. So one more time about dualism. Dualism says that everything in this universe is made out of two kinds of substance. So they say there's both physical matter and also there's mind. So they embrace that there's both. According to them, matter is just all the stuff that's made out of atoms that's occupying space, even including your own body, right? Because it's got material and it's got mass. But aside from that, the dualist claims there's also such a thing as the mind, which is not made out of matter, which does not have any extension, and yet is thinking and has consciousness. So, okay, what's the right answer? Is physicalism true or is dualism true? Well, I couldn't possibly tell you because there's just arguments for both, but I am trying to teach you the arguments that people give to make the case for either one. Okay, so one last look at a review of the Cartesian argument for dualism that we've gone over in the previous few meetings. So one dualist is René Descartes, the classical French philosopher of the 17th century. And I'm just going to really summarize his argument in very basic form here. So we've talked about the very long description of it in the last meeting or so. So I'm just going to try and give you the essence of it really fast. He says, okay, so you can doubt almost anything except one thing, that you exist because you're thinking. Even if everything else is just a dream that you're having, you know you exist because, I mean, you're thinking, right? So the fact that you're thinking establishes the existence of you, the thinker, even if maybe you don't have a body. So even if anything else could be doubted, one thing you can't doubt is that you exist as a mind because you're thinking. And one thing that you have in your mind are ideas. One of them is the idea of God. He says that idea is really special because unlike every other idea in your head, it's the idea of something that is infinite, an infinite being. That's the idea of God. So what he says then after that is this idea had to come from some source. And since it's the idea of something infinite, it has to come from an infinite source. So that must mean there really is a God, because that would be the infinite being, which is the cause of you having an idea of the same. So now he's on the point that God exists because there's no other way you'd have the idea of him, but you do. So he exists, and since he's known to be perfectly good, that means that he is not a deceiver. And since God is not a deceiver, that implies that if you have a very clear and distinct perception of something, then it must really be true, because God would not want you to be mistaken about the things that are the most clear and the most distinct. So from there he says, one thing that's clear and distinct is that if two things could be understood by the mind to exist separately, then the same two things actually are separate in reality. I gave you guys examples like me and this watch. You can imagine me and the watch existing separately, so clearly since that's conceivable, it could really happen, and I could just demonstrate, but we've done that. So any two things that you can imagine being separated, if you can clearly imagine them existing separately, then they really could and can be separated. So from there, the last tail end of the argument is just that you can clearly conceive of your mind, your consciousness, existing separated from your physical body. And since that is clearly conceivable, they must really be capable of existing separately. So essentially, the mind and the body are not the same thing. They're two different things. Why? Because you can imagine them existing separately, and any two things that can be imagined existing separately must be able to exist separately, because that's clear and distinct, and God makes sure that clear and distinct perceptions are true. So anyway, conclusion, there's two things in the universe. There's the mind and there's also the body, and they're not the same. They can be separated. After that, I told you that he gave a few additional clear and distinct perceptions that he just tacks on. Like, for example, he says, it's also very clear and distinct that the external world exists. And his three big reasons for that were, number one, you can't just only perceive the things that you would like to perceive, but if the world was just a dream that you're inventing or something like that, then you would imagine that you probably could create a favorable scenario for yourself just by willing it into existence. People talk about, I'm going to manifest something good, but maybe there's something to that, but in the end, you can't just make anything happen just by thought, and you can't avoid the perception of unpleasant things. The other thing is you can't just create what you perceive through the will. No matter how hard you try right now, you're not going to be able to see in your field of vision like a horse. Even if you think of one in your mind, you can't see one in your environment just by making the thought. So that makes it seem like the external world is not just something that you can decide on for yourself. And then the third thing is that memories are less vivid than original perceptions, which according to him can only really make sense if the original perception was formed when you were surrounded by the external objects in the environment, and the perception that you have in your mind when you remember it later is less clear and is more faded because you're not surrounded by the external objects. So the greater clarity at the beginning indicates that there's external objects that you're actually perceiving there. But if everything was a mental experience and there was no external reality, then why should there be a difference between an immediate perception and a subsequent recollection of it? And then he also said it's clear that you have a body. And he said that for three big reasons. Number one, you can't remove yourself from it, but you can do that with any other body. Number two, you can control the things that the body does with your mind. And also three, you experience the sensations that occur when this body is given some stimuli, but not when others aren't. So anyway, there's Descartes' argument for dualism, but there's a whole other side of this debate, and that's what we need to start with now, and that's the physicalists, the monists that are physicalists. So there's two or three authors that give the case for physicalism. We're starting with this man, and his name is Daniel Stoljar. Okay. Make sure that you can see that's the letter R. Daniel Stoljar. Now this is a relatively current day philosopher. He was born in 1967. And he's still alive. In 2005, he wrote this piece that we're going to talk about today, which is called just Physicalism. So that's what it's called in our book. That's the title, date, and author. So you can sort of see from the title of the paper what it's all about. It's all about physicalism. He has a couple of goals with this paper. First of all, he's going to just try and give a definition of physicalism. Then after that, he wants to try and explain what it means. And then he's going to try and give some arguments that it's true. So he's a physicalist himself, and he wants to define, explain, and then argue in favor of that view. So the first thing he will say in the paper is what the definition of physicalism is in the first place. And he defines it as follows. He defines it as this position that everything is physical. So that's what physicalism, as he would say, everything is physical. Okay, so just for a moment, talking about that definition, what he's saying is everything in the whole universe is just a physical thing. Not some things, not most things. It's a stronger claim than that. Everything, 100% of all things are physical. Put a different way, there is not one thing that is not physical. Everything is. And included within the realm of the physical, since it includes everything, is me and you, our thoughts, but also other things that are less maybe obviously physical things. So it's a claim about the nature of the actual universe. It's saying that this universe we're in is a physical universe and it's just full of physical objects and that's all there is to it. Interesting thing that he says here is this. Although there are many other subjects that people are interested in that they study, right? Like history, art, literature. You might think many of those different fields of study don't have anything to do with physics. But if physicalism is true, and if everything is physical, then he says, in a sense, even those topics which don't immediately seem to be about physics, they're really indirectly related to physics, or they're indirect branches of physics. Because say, for example, a person's studying history, and they're studying some historical event or time period. I don't know, World War II, right? Well, what is World War II to a physicalist? It's really the playing out of human affairs in a certain part of the world. But what are those human affairs? Well, the individuals that are fighting the wars and the citizens of those different nations are just collections of atoms put together a specific way to form those life forms. And those atoms operating according to the natural laws and physical laws give rise to what we call World War II. Or what is a person who's, let's say, writing a poem or creating an artwork doing? If you think of it in a physical sense, they're just a living organism which is exhibiting certain behaviors, and those behaviors get counted as the artistic or literary product. But at the base level, that's still just atoms grouped together in various combinations, formed, and then acting in accordance with natural laws, producing the observable outcomes. So everything is basically physical, even things that at a first glance you wouldn't think too much having to do with physics. Because like, what's literature, poetry, history when you consider physics? Well, it actually still is just a branch of physics, because those people and the things they're doing are completely subsumed by the physical nature of the universe and the natural laws. So after having given that kind of initial opening statement where he just says what physicalism is, and he kind of gives an expression of how universal it is and how broad it is in its extension, he next tries to present two questions. He says these two questions you have to kind of grapple with if you're going to have a full understanding of physicalism. So two questions about physicalism. I'm going to erase this and put them on the board. And remember, he's just saying to you that you got to pretty much kind of deal with these questions, try to answer them in order to be fully clear about what physicalism is and what it's saying. So two questions then that are mentioned by Stoljar here. The first one he calls the interpretation question. Okay, interpretation question, and then the other one is called the truth question. Okay, so first off, the interpretation question is phrased this way. It's simply the question, what does it mean to say that everything is physical? Okay, so that is interpretation question. The truth question is different, but it's on the same subject. It asks this: is it true, though? Is it true that everything is physical? Okay, interpretation question, truth question. So the interpretation question is called that because it's asking, how can I interpret the claim or the statement that everything is physical? Everything is physical is the core definition of physicalism. So interpretation question is just asking, what does it exactly mean, though, this statement that everything is physical? We need to know how to interpret that. We need to know what it means. The truth question is asking, is it true that everything is physical? Is it actually true or not? So one question is just, what does that mean to say it? And then the other one is asking, well, is it true or not? Now, even though the two questions are different, they have a logical relationship because you kind of have to answer one of them first before you can move on to the other one. Let's see if you can think about that. Which one of those two questions here do you believe would be the one that you have to kind of settle first before you can approach or investigate the other one? Which one do you think would have to be the first one that you deal with before you can move on to the other? So the initial first one should be which one? Just thinking about it rationally. Yes, the first question, the interpretation question. Exactly, guys, right. And I'll tell you why. Because you cannot you cannot judge whether something is true or false if you don't even know what the claim is. If I told you, for example, watch out in the fall when you go back to, well, we don't even know if that's going to happen. In fact, we may have online classes into perpetuity for now, but forget about the fall. Imagine I just told you before you started at Fullerton back then, hey, watch out when you're at Fullerton campus because there's bargles all over campus. Now, you would not be able to determine whether what I said was true or false unless you understood the meaning of what I was saying. Like, what is a bargle, and why are you saying that I should watch out for them? So, of course, you couldn't judge whether it was correct or false if you had no idea of what that statement meant. And now, of course, this is a made-up nonsense word, but I'm doing that for effect because I'm trying to show you that if you were scratching your head, what does that mean? Then clearly you would not be in a position to go out and investigate whether it was true or false, right? So yeah, we've got to get a handle on the meaning of the claim that everything is physical first. Then we can move on to consider if it's true or not that everything is physical. So we're going in that order. Next, then, we're going to try and jump into answering that interpretation question. In other words, we're going to try and figure out what does it mean to say that everything's physical. Okay. Now, erase that. Okay, so the interpretation question. In order to answer that question, the usual method of answering it is to look to the notion of what is called supervenience, all right? So I'm going to have to try and really tell you guys now and let you understand what is supervenience, because that is the key to unlock the understanding of what physicalism is saying. So supervenience is our topic for just a moment. So that's the word, supervenience. Now, this is like this is a term that's just jargon internal to the field of philosophy and some physics, but it's not a common word. And I've noticed over the years that it shows up in spell checkers as like an incorrect spelling. So just understand that that is the correct spelling. I'm going to type it also here in the chat so that it's well understood how it's spelled. That's the word, supervenience, okay? Now, what is supervenience? To understand it, you really have to consider the example of what is called a dot matrix picture, okay? So, to follow just now is a little discussion of this concept, dot matrix picture. Okay, so let me talk to you just in like a verbal sense about the idea of a dot matrix picture, and then I'll add some more notes up there in a minute. So a dot matrix picture is an image, a picture, but it's built out of a ton of little dots of ink. Okay, so this is a common method for creating printed images on a printed page. So when you read a newspaper, right, and you see a headline image on the cover of the newspaper, like a photo of, I don't know, like a plane crash or something, that's the like headline. The photo is reproduced exactly on each edition, on each copy of the newspaper. You might wonder, how does that happen? Is it magic? It's certainly not. So basically, you have a grid against which a bunch of individual dots of ink are going to be applied in a particular order and pattern. And once you've given instructions as to how to fill in that grid with individual dots of ink, you convert the photograph into a digitized image, which can be mapped out in terms of the placement of individual ink dots. Then you stamp that image out, and you can simply keep stamping out the exact identical image on each subsequent copy of the newspaper as it slides along the assembly line process. So in your mind, you have to imagine a grid. And what fills the grid are a bunch of little individual elements. Each one is a dot of whatever color. If you were to zoom in very close on that and look at it under a magnifying glass or whatever, you'd just see the dots. But when you back out, what you see is the image that the dots form in combination. And so you see the big picture, right? It's similar to a technique in art which is known as mosaic. Okay, so anybody who knows about a mosaic, you'd know that that's a big picture, but it's made out of, in this case, not tiny ink dots, but rather tiles of various color. And looked at under a close magnification, you see the individual tiles, but when you zoom out, you see the big picture or scene that is the product of all of the tiles combined. Okay? I want to give you one more example of a dot matrix-like structure that maybe you have some understanding of. And this has to do not with printed images or art made out of tiles, but rather images viewed on like a monitor or screen, like what you're looking at right now, for example, watching this lecture. So when it comes to computer monitors, cell phones, tablets, TV screens, they are also projecting images on the screen that are formed out of a bunch of little individual elements, except in the case of, let's say, like your computer monitor that you're looking at right now, these individual items that form the basis that composes the scene image, they're not dots of ink, they're not tiles, but what are they? Does anybody know this? What are the little bits that jointly combine to form an image on any digital monitor? Can you tell me that? I think probably some of you do know it. So what's the term we're looking for here? The surrogate for dots in the context of, yes, pixels, exactly, Nicole Abraham. If that was what anyone else was thinking, that's correct. So pixels. How does your screen work that you're looking at right now? Again, it's not anything strange or magical. There's a specific technological explanation. So your screen has a given resolution, which is how many pixels are displayed on the backlight of the monitor. Now, when we circulate images, share memes, photographs, or whatever, there's a certain set of instructions that's given to the screen in terms of how to illuminate the individual pixels so as to form the reproduced image. What is a pixel? If you look very close at your monitor, right, like with a magnifying glass, for example, you would see under that high magnification that it's an array of ever so many little individual pixels. Now, one pixel is like a little tricolor panel. And basically, the computer is given instructions as to how to illuminate each pixel such that it will project an image onto somebody's screen. And so another device of similar or greater resolution will be able to perfectly copy over and port over the same image because, again, the digital instructions for how the pixels will be illuminated to frame or give the image, display the image, is going to just be the same. All right, so I've given you 3 different ways of thinking about the concept of a dot matrix picture. The old school, like literal example of a dot matrix image formed out of dots, the artistic example of a mosaic-like creation made out of little tiles, or perhaps the modern computing equivalent or television viewing equivalent where there are pixels that are used to display an image. Okay, now I'm going to draw here on the board my clumsy, crude attempt to give you a visual, because visuals sometimes are helpful for learning. So I just want us to have something we can all kind of focus on together. So here, let's pretend, is a fully realized dot matrix picture. Okay, so that's just the frame. But within it, here's what we got. I'll get that one a little bit better. Have I done better? I don't know. But I tried my best, okay. You know what? I gotta do better. Could be better a little bit, but anyway, there you go. So, you know, given my obvious limitations as a visual artist. I just did the best that I could. So let me just see if we can at least have a sense of what I've tried to draw here. What is that scene? Anybody have a guess or quick hot take? What is that scene there that I'm trying to draw? Is, yes, a nice sunny day at the beach or whatever. It's the ocean waves. That's what these little things are. There's the sun shining, okay? And then you can see, I don't know, a couple of birds up there floating around, flying, as they say, up in the air. Okay, so now why is it that I try to take care to like put a bunch of little dots down? Well, because, good, yeah, Nicole, I'm glad that we clarified that, because you're not the only one who's ever said that, right? I mean, someone else had said the same, like, is these snow-peaked mountaintops and the birds are soaring above the mountains? Could have been, but let's just all get on the same page that the professor was not so great drawing talent, attempted to depict an ocean scene, okay? Yeah, so why did I make these little dots? Well, because I'm trying to give you the sense that little dots put together in a certain order can form the big image, okay? Now, piece of terminology to add. The author speaks of what are called global features of these dot matrices, or dot matrices, I guess, to be precise, and use the plural. What is a global feature of a dot matrix image? So I'll put the definition here. Global feature. So global feature is just the term that the author is using to refer to a big picture, large scale aspect of the dot matrix, or we could just say of the composite image. So a large scale, let me put it this way, a big picture / large scale aspect of the composite. Composite, a thing that's composed out of the little individual elements. So let me discuss. The term global feature, as you see it defined, refers to any macroscopic, not micro, but macroscopic aspect of such a composite structure. So you basically need to think that a global feature is not one of the little atoms or dots. It's something that is formed from those things when they combine together in the larger image. Okay, so if we are tracking this definition and this example, who could tell me what is, for example, a global feature of this composite? You know, you see that dot matrix picture I tried to draw. What is, for example, a global feature of it? Since a global feature is a big picture, large-scale aspect of the composite, what is one of those considering this example here? Global feature of the example on the board could be blank. Okay, good, Abraham. The birds, that's one example, yes. And why? Well, because these birds that are depicted in the dot matrix are something that is displayed when a lot of the little dots come together in combination. Okay, what could be another one? The waves or the sun. Okay, so a global feature of any dot matrix or similar analogy to that, like a composite of whatever kind, is going to be something that stands out as having been formed by all the little elements as they are combined in that array. Okay, so now, given what we know about this dot matrix concept and the definition global feature, let's make a logical point that I hope just is very obvious. Say that we had a second dot matrix here to the right, but say that that second dot matrix was a perfect duplicate of this one in the sense that it was a dot for dot duplication. So everywhere there's a dot here, there's an equivalent dot arrangement in the second image. I'm talking about what if we had a second matrix like this, which was dot for dot exactly arranged in the same order and pattern as this one. Okay, well, if all of the little individual dots were put in the same exact order, then would they have the same global features in the second image? I hope understand my question, right? So we have this dot matrix formed out of the dots back there. Suppose we had a second one, which was exactly copied in terms of the ordering of each dot. Would it have all the same global features, Abraham? Correct. Yes, it would. So understand that when we compare two dot matrices, if they both have the exact same pattern of dots, then they must have all the same global features too. So if they're the same at the micro level, right, then they're going to have all identical features at the macro big picture level as well. So essentially the rule is if you have two matrices with the same parts, then they're going to have the same holistic features too. When I say same parts, you know what I mean is same ordering of parts in comparison to each other. That would mean that they're going to have the same global features too. Abraham, you say, can we kind of connect to reproduction in a way? I'm not sure how to think about that yet. What is the question? So, I mean, with reproduction, like in biology, like a species is born because the parent organisms conceive it. But we're not necessarily on the topic of an individual item within the bigger picture here. I'm just trying to compare two complete formed dot matrices. And if you looked into each one and you saw that they were dot for dot identical in order and placement, then they would just basically be copies of each other. That would be a copy of this. And so it would have to have, again, yes, the same looking birds, the same looking ocean waves, and the same looking sun shining down. Now, second point. Say that there are two dot matrix images, but they differ in a global feature. So suppose that I had a second dot matrix next by to this, and it was exactly the same except for one thing, there's like a missing bird. Okay, now, if there's a different global feature in the second matrix, then do they have to have a different arrangement of dots? Yes, of course. Because if they had the same arrangement of dots, they would have had the same exact global features. So if they have the same dot order, same global features. Different global features, comparing two different composites, that amounts to having differences in the patterning and order of dots. Okay, so now this example is going to extend to the physical universe. That's what's next. What we are going to mention now is that our physical reality is very much similar to these dot matrices. Now the terminology supervenience, that gets used as a verb. What we say is that the global features of the composite supervene on the pattern of the dots. That is really just a fancy way of saying that all the big picture aspects of this are built out of the atomic distribution of elements, and that's all there is to them. So the large scale aspects reduce to supervene on the arrangement of individual dots. This then is being used as an example to compare to the physical universe. Okay, so now I really want us to think about how this could possibly be comparable to physical space and reality. Now, in our physical universe, according to physicalism anyway, but maybe just according to common sense, what do you think would be the stand-in for these little dots? Okay, now in this case, they're ink dots. In a computer monitor, they're pixels. What about in physical reality? What could be the thing that is sort of serving the role of these dots that we're using as an analogy? Physical objects like me and you and tables and chairs and everything around us, they're also formed from a bunch of little bits, except these are not dots of ink, nor are they pixels. So what are the little individual elements of physical reality? We've talked about them, but yet again, let's go back. They're called what? So comparing the dot matrix that you see on the board to reality, real reality, what would be the thing that would be equivalent to an individual dot? Right, atoms. Okay, so tiny little atomic particles are similar by example to these dots because they are the building blocks that construct everything bigger. Okay, so as I was talking about in this actual example of a dot matrix, if we had a second dot matrix which was and a duplicate at the level of dot placement, then they would have the same global features. So now I want you to really think outside the box for a minute, and I want you to try and consider the possible case of a second physical universe. Okay, so this is our universe, and look around you, there it is. But imagine that there was another one, right? And imagine that this second universe was atomically identical to ours. So it was like atom for atom, the exact same arrangement, the exact same order. So what would that second universe be like if this concept of supervenience is true? The second universe, which compared to ours is atomically identical, would have exactly the same what? Well, what would it be like, that second universe? If it was an atomic copy of ours, then what would it be like compared to ours? Sort of just following the logic here that we've presented. It would be exactly parallel, right? It would be equivalent to our universe in every last way. So it would have the same global features as we have in our universe, the same objects and the same events. We termed global features a big picture or large scale aspect of a composite, right? And you guys gave me the right answer, good, Nicole and others. Yes, it would be the same. But when we talked about the definition of global feature, I asked you, okay, looking at this picture, what's a global feature? And someone said one of the birds. That's good. Now, how about physical universe? What, for example, would be a global feature of this universe? Now I'm not pointing you to the example on the board, but I'm asking you to just think about actual reality. What would be, according to the way the definition is expressed, what would be, for example, and you've got infinitely many options to choose from, but just throw out some random things. What would be a global feature or features of this universe, this actual universe? Or world, you know, whatever. What could be a global feature? There's many options to go with, but let's see what you'll come up with. Global feature of actual reality. Okay, humans, you're saying solar system, shape of the earth. That's all good. Yes, exactly. Are you a global feature of the universe, according to the definition here? Well, I'll give you the spoiler, yes. Because what are you if physicalism is true? You are a set of atoms that are aggregated together to form the living organism that you are. So you are like a composite built out of the little individual elements, except in the case of me and you and everything around us, these elements are not pixels nor dots of ink, but simply atoms. Okay, so what the claim of physicalism is that everything in the whole universe is just made out of the atoms, including me, you, and our consciousness. So if there were, for the sake of argument, a second universe, which had the exact same atomic facts, then it would have the exact same events, objects, and psychological experiences. So in this twin universe that I'm just postulating when we discuss this, would there be a copy of you? Would there be a duplicate of you if there were another closed physical universe with exactly the same arrangement of atoms? Yeah, there would be. There would be for sure. And that duplicate of you in that twin universe would be experiencing this lecture just like you are. Because what is this lecture itself? And you and me and everything else according to physicalism? It's all just a big outcome of the arrangement of atoms at the atomic level. So, like we said with the dot matrices that we compare with each other, if there were two with the same microscopic elemental facts, then they're going to be the same at the global level too. So the same parts and the same arrangement of parts would lead to the same whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole. And if there were, let's say, another universe which was very similar, except in that universe, you don't have like your pinky finger or something, then even a small difference like that would mean that they cannot be exactly the same ordering of atoms, because that's a different ordering of atoms by hypothesis if it's differing from the way things are here. So this then gives us the ability, this example of supervenience, the relationship of the big picture stuff boiling down to and ultimately being nothing other than the arrangement of elements that make it up. This gives us the ability to give a powerful and clear statement of what physicalism means. And so that's what we get now. So he puts it like this. This is the sort of summary distillation of the preceding 15 minutes of discussion here. He states it as this principle. Physicalism is true at a possible world W just in case, and then we get the conditions, just in case any world which is an atomic duplicate of W is a duplicate of W in all respects. Is an atomic duplicate of W, is identical to W in all respects. Okay, so physicalism is true at a possible world W just in case any world which is an atomic duplicate of it is identical to it in every other way as well. So looking at this principle and statement of physicalism, the claim is this, that if our world is W, if physicalism is true here, then what that means is that if there were another universe / world, whatever term you want to use, but if there were another one that was exactly atomically duplicated into ours, then it wouldn't just be physically the same, it would be the same in every way, socially, historically, psychologically, aesthetically, everything about it would be down to the very last detail, or consciousness itself, then the atoms in physical space that compose everything. So alongside this claim is the notion that if there were a second universe that was a physical duplicate of ours, then there couldn't possibly be different thoughts that your duplicate would have in that universe. So in the physical copy of our universe, it's not like your twin in that world could be thinking different thoughts than you're thinking here. It's not like your twin in that world could have missed this lecture, but you're attending it. Because if the physical facts are exactly the same, then the behavioral, psychological, and all other larger scale phenomena are exactly the same. Would coronavirus have hit in that duplicate universe? Yes, because it's the byproduct of the atomic facts playing out in a certain way. So by hypothesis, if the atomic facts were held fixed in a second closed physical system, then there couldn't possibly be a difference of consciousness or of world events, global pandemics, or anything else. So what it means to say that everything is physical, going back to the interpretation question that we were pursuing, what it means is to say that everything supervenes on atoms, such that if we had two comparative physical systems which were physically identical, then they would have to be identical in every other way as well, okay? Because the physical identity of the two governs everything that happens in them, and it is fully constitutive of everything that happens in both. So yeah, physicalism relies on the concept of supervenience. It's a core commitment of physicalism, and that's why the author Stoljar thought that it would be very important to make sure the reader understood how to understand that idea. So now you guys do. In its essence, it's basically saying that our universe are kind of like those little dot matrices, except obviously much bigger with a lot more global features. But the similarity is there because just as much as that example, we're built out of a bunch of little elemental physical objects, call them atoms. And just like how in substitute for the dots of ink or pixels, if you have a big structure that's fully made out of those little atomic elements, then if a second system existed which had the same patterning of those atomic elements, it would give rise to the exact same type of structure. So consciousness is nothing different from that. It's something that results from the atomic distribution of atoms, and it's fully governed by the nature of how they are arranged. Okay. So after that, the next thing he wants to do is try and tackle that second question. Now I guess that we have a better understanding of what physicalism means, what it means to say that everything is physical. He wants to move on to the second question that he mentioned, which is it true, though, that everything is physical? And he does think it's true. And he gives two arguments to try and defend that, yes, it's true. So I'm going to help you guys understand those two arguments that he gives in favor of physicalism. Okay, so the first of these two arguments given for physicalism is the argument he calls the argument from causal closure. Let's make sure, too, that we correctly spell this word, because I often see a misspelling that student work will have, and it will say casual, but it's not. That's not the word. This is not the word casual. It's the word causal, as in cause and effect. There's a close similarity in the way the two words are spelled, but they're spelled differently, because casual is C-A-S-U-A-L. Causal is C-A-U-S-A-L. And they mean completely different things. Causal has to do with of cause, as in cause and effect. So if I say there's a causal connection between me going out in the snow and then getting sick, I'm basically claiming that I might get sick because I go in the snow. Casual, though, has nothing to do with that. Casual is like, you're wearing shorts and a t-shirt to the office because they say it's casual day, and so you don't have to wear the formal attire of the office. But don't confuse the two. This has nothing to do with casual. The word is causal, so just that's something I want you to know. Okay, argument from causal closure. This is an argument which says that, well, let me just walk you through it, okay? So there's three premises to the argument that lead to one conclusion. Basically, the upshot of the argument overall is that your behavior that you exhibit as a human being is really just caused by the physical brain, and that's the only thing that causes it. That there's no second cause, that there's no like soul or mind or spirit separate from the brain. It's just your physical brain, and that's causing everything you do. But let's see how the argument works. Okay, so the first premise of the argument is this premise, that every event which has a cause has a physical cause. That's the first premise. So every event which has a cause has a physical cause. That's first premise. So allow me to explain. All that's saying is that, since we live in a physical universe, when things happen and they're the effect of something, whatever their cause was some physical cause. Like, for example, say that a person's car is parked somewhere and a tree branch from overhead falls onto the hood of their car and causes a dent. Now that's the effect, that's the event that happened, the denting of the hood. But if you trace that back to like the cause, what caused it? Okay, well, I mean, we have a set of physical factors, right? The gradual weakening of the branch by passing winds and weather and so on got to a point where it was brittle enough that a significant gust of wind caused it to sever and, disconnect from the other structure of the tree. Then, given its mass, wind currents, and its shape, right, it takes a path of travel downward towards the car. Then when it strikes the car, the mass of the falling object impacts the hood, producing the dent. So at every stage of that cause and effect story, we just have physical events causing other physical events. And what that's saying is that it's not just limited to my one randomly created example. It's everything. If a plant grows, what's causing that? Well, light that physically strikes it, plus moisture in the environment is taken in, collected by the plant, producing materials that it needs to survive and grow, and then it does exhibit the growth. On and on and on. So in general, every event that has any cause in this universe has a physical cause. Okay. Now the second premise follows afterwards. The second premise is kind of interesting, so let me explain it. It says, mental events can cause physical events. Okay, so premise 2. Mental events can cause physical events. Now let me explain that little point. What it's saying basically is that thinking, right, like thought and will can and does lead to or cause physical behavior. Okay, so basically by thinking you can make your body do things that we can then all observe. Like as an example, right, I want to snap my fingers to illustrate to you how thought can lead to action. So the snapping of the fingers has not yet happened, but it's going to happen in a second because I want to do it. So, okay, you saw me snap my fingers. What caused that? What caused these hands to snap? Well, Rami, your question is, does that relate to the placebo effect? I guess I see sort of what you mean. Like if you believe that you're going to be healed by the placebo, then sometimes the psychosomatic effect of that can actually produce like therapeutic benefits for some people. Now, in many cases though, saying that the placebo was not more or less effective than the actual medicine is not so good for the effect of the medicine, because it's supposed to have a more statistically measurable impact on the person. But it's not limited to that one case though, Rami. It's any action at all that can be produced by the mind. So I'm not just talking about, Alan, no, let's get back to the main theme here. I'm not talking about like by thinking stuff you can make yourself feel some type of way. I'm really just talking about like literally, if I want to raise my left hand right now, it goes up just because I thought to do it. If I want to speak to you like I'm speaking to you right now, it's happening because I want to speak and I have a thought process which leads to the emission of the sound waves out of my mouth. You think, then it happens. It's not just like I'm willing myself to recover. That's too specific of an example. It's much more generic. It's like just any action ever that any human being ever does initiates by their mind, unless they're like, you know, like an autonomic response. Like, I don't know, if you hit me on the knee and my knee does a reflex, that's an exception to this general thought. But all that's said here is that thought can produce action. Let me give you an example of this, okay? Going back in time a little bit to the time of Abraham Lincoln. So how did he die? Well, the cause of death, gunshot. Okay, so why did he die? Because a bullet struck him in a vital area and he died from the wound. Why did the bullet strike him though? Well, okay, that was caused because it was ejected from the firing mechanism of the barrel of a firearm. But why did it eject from the barrel? Well, that is because pressure was applied to the trigger on the firearm. And when the pressure was applied, it caused the ejection of the bullet. But then if we ask, why was pressure applied to the trigger? It's because muscles contracted in the hand of John Wilkes Booth, who was holding the firearm, right? So he depressed, or in other words, squeezed the trigger, which caused that bullet to fall, to eject, which caused Lincoln to die. But then, last question, as we go back in this causal story, what caused the hand muscles to contract? I guess, well, I can add one more link. Because the brain sent a signal through the nervous system to contract the muscle, and therefore it did. But why did the signal get delivered to the hand? It all started with what? What started this chain of events that led to the tragic death of Abraham Lincoln? We said he died from the bullet, which came from the gun, which was fired out because of the trigger being pulled, and the trigger was pulled because of the contraction of hand muscles. But why did the hand muscles contract? It's because of the intention of the assassin, right? It was because he had a thought that he wanted to do it, and therefore he led himself through the physical actions of his body, which ultimately caused the death of, you know, the great President Lincoln. Now, I'm just giving you that one weird example, and it doesn't have to be based on that, but it's something that's memorable enough that maybe you remember it. And it's just a case like of thought leading to an outcome in the world. And it's just as easy for me to say, I want to clap my hands and then watch it happen. See, something like that. So that's all premise 2 is saying, that the mind, through thought, can will the behavior of the body. So that's a physical event when the body moves. When we're in class, and I would teach this material in the physical class, I would like call on students, and when the student has their hand up, I would use that as a teachable moment. And I would say, so your hand just went up in the air physically. What caused it to go up? You know, and the student, of course, is going to say, because I wanted to ask you a question, Professor, or because I wanted to answer your question that you posed to the classroom. And so in that case, the student's desire to talk and to be a part of the class communication led to the raising of the hand. Okay. So we got our first two premises, but we're not done. There's a third premise coming. So the third premise of the argument is kind of the most complex looking of all the steps in the argument. So just bear with me as I write it down one time. And then, even though I know it might look a little confusing at a first glance, I will really do my best to simplify it so everyone knows what I'm talking about or what the argument's talking about. So here's the third premise of the argument. It says this, okay? It says, if an event A causes some other event B, so if A causes B, then in that case, A is the only cause of B. Basically, in that case, there's no other event that's different from A, which is also the cause of B. So let me write that and I'll just explain more. So if an event A causes an event B, then there is no other event C which is different from A and which also causes B. And I'll type this also because I can see it's getting close to the bottom of the page here on the board. But anyway, which is different from A and which also causes B. Now, legibility issues aside, I'm going to go ahead and type that out. So if event A causes an event B, then there's no other event C which is different from A which also. Okay, so if it's clear to see it in the chat, then you can see it typed out. What premise 3 is saying is that if A causes B, I'm going to put it to you as a question. I want you to think a little bit. So what do you think is the answer to this question? According to premise 3, every effect has exactly how many causes? How many causes are there for a given effect according to premise 3? Each effect has exactly this number of causes. What's the number? What is it? So if A causes B, then there is no other event C that is different from A, which also causes B. Simply stated, in other words, there's only one cause for every effect. That's correct. That's what 3 is saying. So it is saying there is exactly one cause for every effect, not 0 and not a number greater than 1, not 2, 3, 4, or any other number. There's just one cause for each effect. That's what it says. It says if A caused B, basically what the rest of it says is then it's the only cause of B. There's not anything else different from A that is like a second extra cause of B. It's just A by itself. Okay, so put these 3 premises together and they lead to the conclusion that we're going to write here. Now, in your own notes, a conclusion in a logical argument should find itself at the bottom, below the premises. Since I don't want to erase all the previous premises, I'm going to draw an arrow that puts the conclusion at the top. But for you, anyway, it probably in your notes should show that the conclusion's below. Okay. So we're ready to get to our deductive conclusion here. Conclusion. Therefore, mental events are physical events, and therefore physicalism is true. Okay, so let me explain why this conclusion results from those premises. From premise 1, every event in this universe that has a cause at all has a physical cause. From premise 2, your mind can be the cause of your bodily behavior. So 1 and 2 put together imply that when your thought produces an observable action, that's the brain, the physical brain, which is that cause. We know that the physical brain is definitely causally responsible for issuing nerve signals, etc., to the parts of your body, which then show movement, skill, speech, or anything else that you're capable of doing in life. Since the brain is the physical cause of your behavior, premise 3 kicks in and then says it's the only cause of your behavior. So what premise 3 is basically saying is that since your brain is already a sufficient explanation of your physical activity, there's no room for a second cause besides the physical brain. So essentially, it's not like there's both the brain that causes you to act, but also separate from that, a soul, a spirit, or mind, if you like to use the philosophy term. The brain is the sole sufficient cause of your behavior. Basically, it's claiming premise 3 that it would be unnecessary and superfluous to assert the existence of a secondary cause of your behavior, since we know the brain is already there, and we know that it is the physical cause of your behavior. So there's only one cause for each effect. Your brain is the cause of your behavior and actions, and since there's only one cause to each effect, that's all there is going on. Just the physical brain is issuing these effects, which we then can see as your behavior, but there's nothing aside from that. Premise 3 is called the exclusion principle, and it's called the exclusion principle because it's saying that when you have a cause of something, it excludes all other things from also being the cause, because there's never more than one cause for any effect. So hopefully that's making some decent sense to you. When I'm like gonna clap my hands as an illustration of the point premise number 2, the idea of the argument is that my brain is causing my hands to do that, my physical brain. And since that is enough to explain the exhibited behavior, it's both unnecessary and superfluous to assess that there is anything else that's responsible for it besides the physical brain. So if mental events are physical events, right? If you thinking, I'm going to, I don't know, turn on the internet and like watch some YouTube videos, and then you do it, that's all being done by the brain. And it's claiming here that those events of thinking that produce the behavior themselves are just brain events, physical events. If the thought processes that lead to your overt behavior are themselves just physical events, then everything's physical. Because the only thing in the world that people have a tendency to think is not physical is the nexus between thought and action. People think, well, I'm a soul, right? Or I have a spirit or some kind of mind that's not necessarily reducible to my physical body. But if your thoughts that produce your actions are just physical events, then it seems like there's no space in this universe for anything other than physical events. That's the argument anyway. So argument from causal closure, everybody. I told you though that there's one more. So there's one more argument that he gives just after this. It's much more simple, I think, but this is, I find, the more interesting of the two arguments given by Stoljar. Nonetheless, he has one more attempt to try and persuade you that physicalism is true. So if the argument from causal closure didn't do the trick, he has one more, and that he calls the argument from methodological naturalism. Okay, so Daniel Stoljar's second crack at trying to prove, that physicalism is true. This is argument from methodological naturalism. Okay, so this argument, pretty straightforward. First premise just says, it is reasonable to believe what is believed by the methods of natural science. Okay? It's reasonable to believe what scientists believe, basically. That's what that's saying. If you follow the lead of the scientific consensus, then you're going to be reasonable, because what scientists claim on the basis of their research and etc., those are reasonable claims. That's all that says. So when you believe as the scientist does, you inherit that rationality and reasonability, and now your belief is reasonable too. So basically, like if the scientists say, I don't know, that the planet is a sphere, and you just defer to the scientists, you're being reasonable, because all their views are not just coming out of nowhere, but they're based on scientific evidence that can be tested for its accuracy. So simply stated, it's reasonable to go with science and believe what they believe. The second premise then just adds to that by saying physicalism is believed by the methods of natural science. Okay, and so once again, due to limitations of board space, I'm going to draw an arrow presenting the conclusion up here, but you should put it at the bottom in your own notes. So what's the conclusion? Deduce it for me. It's easy enough. The first premise says it's reasonable to believe whatever is believed by science, pretty much. The second premise says physicalism is believed by natural science. So, therefore what? Therefore, who could tell me? Therefore what? Reasonable to believe what scientists do. They believe in physicalism. And so therefore, thus, hence, so, it follows that. Consequently, what's the conclusion? You know, it's a little deduction for you. Putting 2 and 2 together. Combining 1 and 2, what's the result there? Reasonable to believe what's believed by science. By the way, they believe in physicalism. So thus, what? Just need to hear it from you. I mean, because I already know it, but I want you to draw a connection, and then it'll make it more secure in your mind, right? Because you have the justification instead of just trying to remember things. You'll know the justification, and that'll help you remember it better. So what's the conclusion? Please tell me. It's reasonable to believe what's believed by science. Premise 1. Premise 2. Physicalism is believed by science. So it's elementary. What's the conclusion? Therefore, it's reasonable to believe in almost, Alan. I think the word, though, you're looking for there is physicalism. Yeah? Okay. But that's it. So therefore, it is reasonable to believe in physicalism. Okay, so, no, it's good. Yeah, don't worry about that, Alan. So let me just kind of go over it one last time. The first premise, just being more detailed about it, it says that what scientists believe is reasonable for you to believe. Now, that's a hard premise to really dispute because, I mean, even if some people don't always agree with scientific claims that are made, right, it's very difficult for you to stand up and say, but those people that are saying those things are just saying unreasonable, irrational things. Science is by definition rational because you have to give scientific empirical evidence that can be tested by the field of scientists who replicate those results or findings. No scientist can just go up and be like, here's my theory, but I have no evidence for it, and it's just how I'm kind of feeling today, and that's what I think. That would be unreasonable. But science, by its very definition, requires that you collect data from empirical observations of the world, you form hypotheses that explain the existence of some phenomena, and then you create an experiment which can either confirm or disconfirm the hypothesis. If it gains confirmation from the hypothesis and then you publish those results and other scientists replicate the results, this is not at all just like random stipulations or completely unbased claims. It's based on detailed evidence that is accessible to independent inquiry. So even those that are not the hugest fans of science have a hard time saying that that's not reasonable what the people in the scientific field are saying. So that's all number one is saying. Scientists are pretty reasonable when they deploy their methods. So when you follow their lead, you're being reasonable by extension. And the second premise simply adds to that physicalism is the consensus belief of natural science, at least for practicing scientists, They have to assume that everything's physical, otherwise there would be things that could escape physical observation that we'd never be able to know about. So therefore, it must be reasonable to believe physicalism. Why again? Because scientists believe it. And, by the way, it's reasonable to follow their assumptions. Now, last thing I'll say about the two arguments that I've just reported to you, causal closure versus methodological naturalism. They're both, arguments that try and prove or demonstrate that physicalism is true. But I kind of prefer the previous one to this one. And that's because, in my view anyway, this one is just telling you to kind of outsource the intellectual labor to the presumed rational, intelligent practitioners of science in the scientific community. And although that is fair, because we do have to defer to specialists and experts in areas where we don't ourselves possess the expertise, right? So like you might not be able to take on a course of study to learn everything about theoretical physics, genetics, medicine, and on and on and on. So when you hear a specialist or an expert in that field give you some information, deferring to them is wise and rational because they have had a more intensive course of study on it than you. And we have to, leave sometimes the experts to their expert judgment and just follow their lead, right? But the thing is, a more satisfying argument intellectually doesn't just tell you, hey, there's smart people over there and just follow whatever they do, but rather gives you a reason that it sounds true to your own independent judgment. And that's why, like, in my view anyway, I prefer the causal closure argument because it makes a case that you can think about independently. It says there's only one cause for each effect, right? And we already know your brain is the cause of your behavior, so there can't be anything else. It's just the brain. Therefore, in that case, you're thinking about reasons why physicalism might be true. In this case, the reasons why it is true are just kind of like a black box. Like there's just rational scientists over there who knows why they're saying this, but they seem to have, come to the conclusion of physicalism. So just go ahead and believe the same thing, and then you'll kind of inherit or piggyback on their rationality. But I'd rather be the kind of individual who has the first order understanding of why it's rational, rather than just sort of taking it by way of authority intellectually that it's considered to be reasonable. Nonetheless, they're two different arguments that are trying to reach the same goal, to persuade someone to think physicalism is true, either because there can't be more than one cause for each effect, or because in deference to scientific consensus, physicalism seems to be the prevailing view. All right, everyone. Well, that's what I had today for Daniel Stoljar. So Wednesday, we're going to cover J.J.C. Smart and Alan Turing. So we're going to cover those last two authors on this philosophy of mind stuff. And then, sorry, question here. When would it be the latest to send in my essay for you to look at? Oh, yeah. I would still look at essays that are sent to me as late as maybe this weekend. But if they come in on Sunday, then it might be a little tight on time. So all the way up till and through Friday for sure. And maybe Saturday morning, afternoon would even be all right. I'm replying to emails as they come in. So yeah, if you had drafts or questions or anything you want in terms of feedback, I'm happy to help. Just give me at least a few days before the due date itself so that I can go over that. Oh wait, I'm thinking of the wrong date. Our class, right, isn't it due on Wednesday the 6th? Am I getting that right? I was thinking of a different class for which it is due Monday. But if I am correct in my memory now that it's the 6th, then I'll be able to answer responses all the way through the weekend up through Monday, okay? So let's say, given that accurate description of the fact, right, it's, who can confirm? I've sent you the notification. You know about it. Isn't it May 6th, Wednesday next week that it's due? Correct. Okay, good. So thank you. That means that I'll be able to accept papers for drafts and comments all the way up till Monday, let's say. That gives you 48 hours at a minimum for me to answer your email and for you to maybe integrate the comments into your draft. So yeah, anyone who wants help on their paper from me can feel free to send me a draft as late as Monday, preferably sooner than that. And the later it gets till Wednesday, the less likely it is that I'll be able to answer it. Papers and stuff coming in on Tuesday or Monday night might be harder, but all the way up through the weekend is fine. So make sure if you want to try and get it in that sort of frame of time. Okay, guys, so great. Thank you for the good meeting. Thanks for everyone's help and contributions. Take care. Have a nice day. I'm glad that you're off to a good start this week, and I'll see you back on Wednesday. So until then, take it easy. I'll see you. Bye-bye.